All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ROMILDAMOR's official webinar on COVID-19 and human trafficking. Of course, thank you very much for joining us, and particular thanks today goes to our sponsor, Korean White Company. It is only through support like this and attendance from wonderful individuals like you that we can continue to hold events like this, so thank you. To introduce myself, my name is Megan Sutcliffe. I'm a capacity building ambassador at ROMILDAMOR. I'll be the host for today, so if you have any questions at all regarding how this event is going to be run, please feel free to ask me. I am here to help. Just to go through some basic housekeeping rules before we begin, I would just like to run through some basic points so that this can all work smoothly and easily. Mics in general are going to be muted during the webinar just to avoid any disruptions, but if you have any questions, please feel free to use the hands up function to let us know that you have something you would like to say. We, of course, are going to have a Q&A, a question and answer session following the webinar and following most of our content. And during this time, you can either ask questions in the chat section, obviously on Zoom, or raise your hand and we will of course unmute you and your mic for your question. Finally, just as a note, as you can see on screen, this webinar is going to be recorded, so please feel free to turn off your camera if that is preferable, or keep it on. We're happy either way, whatever makes you the most comfortable. So to introduce ROMILDAMOR and what we do. ROMILDAMOR is a women's rights organization founded in 2013 that focuses on providing development opportunities for forgotten and vulnerable communities, particularly the survivors of human trafficking, gender-based violence, and child marriage. While, of course, there are many incredible organizations that work to support survivors, we differentiate ourselves by stepping in at the immediate post-trafficking stage so that we can help to break the vicious cycle of violence and give our clients the tools to achieve their dreams. We do this by operating in two very distinct fields, which you can see on your screen here. Our first is capacity building. This is where we aim to directly help survivors in three particular ways. Our first is through legal and immigration support, so that any survivor facing legal troubles can have adequate legal support and representation. Indeed, our founder, Romilda, is a lawyer herself, and she will be working with other legal experts to provide pro bono support to human trafficking survivors, given the complexity of their needs and often how many survivors may not have recourse to public funds or do not have adequate funds themselves. We are here to help. Our second area of support for survivors is therapy support. Given the complexity of mental health difficulties that survivors often face, we will work with experts who will be able to continue to provide therapy sessions to all survivors that come under our care. And finally, we come to our arguably most important stage of academic and career development. We endeavour to help survivors continue their education at any level, if that's what they would like to do, whether that is from primary school to tertiary and advanced education, or also providing career advice and support so that they can reclaim their agency and pursue careers that they find truly fulfilling, that they find satisfying, and that they want to go after. However, of course, while all of these services are incredibly important and we're very, very proud to be providing or endeavour to be providing them, it will be nothing without our second area of action, which is community awareness, essentially where we help to educate local communities. In short, we believe that knowledge is power, and the more that people know about something that is unjust, the more that they will feel compelled to do something to stop it, to do something about it. As such, we host awareness screenings, educational brunches, and of course, webinars like this one today in order to improve the level of awareness, but also the sensitivity of people when it comes to human trafficking. In short, we work both internally and externally to support survivors of human trafficking while raising awareness in the wider community. We also have our Fashion Fund, which is the passion project of our founder, Romilda Domprey Esquire, who is also going to be our speaker for today. So Romilda is a human rights lawyer and the founder of ROMILDAMOR. She founded us 7 years ago to bridge the gap that she saw in the services that were being provided or not provided to vulnerable and forgotten communities. And she's here today to begin our webinar and to begin our talk regarding COVID-19 and human trafficking. So Romilda.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm sharing the screen, so bear with me while I just fix up and set up all the functionalities of today. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. All right then. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me on what appears to be a moderately cloudy and rainy day here in the UK. As Megan stated, my name is ROMILDAMOR. I am the founder and creator of ROMILDAMOR. We are a women's rights organisation that works to support women and girls who have been victimised by the ongoing practice of human trafficking. I am a lawyer by practice and a women's rights activist by choice. So, today I will be highlighting 2 global issues. One of them is affecting almost every human being here on Earth, and the other more of a selected group. So we're going to look further into what these issues are. Covid-19 and human trafficking. So I'm sure you can all agree with me when I say that Covid-19 is something that every human being has been impacted by in one way or another within the past, say, 8 to 9 months. However, human trafficking is something that really affects a selected group of individuals. The purpose of this webinar is to show you how the first issue, Covid-19, is having a negative counter effect on the other. And in order to do that, we're going to break this down into 4 segments. So today I'm going to walk you through these 4 segments. We're going to talk about human trafficking. We will look into what it is and how individuals actually become victims to it. Second of all, we'll talk briefly about COVID-19 and the impact this global pandemic has had on us all, and even what it's going to have on the future of our world as well. Thirdly, we will speak about the link here. So we'll talk about the impact of COVID-19 on human trafficking, particularly how this pandemic is negatively affecting the safety and well-being of human trafficking victims and survivors. And then finally, we will speak about your part. We will discuss what you and companies that you represent can do to help and contribute to the fight against this practice. So let's jump right into it. One thing I do want to say is I want this webinar to be as engaging as possible. I'm sure you've all been to lectures before. I don't want this to be boring. I want you guys to be able to feel free to engage with me. So there is a thumbs up icon on your screen, and at some points I will interject and just say, give me a thumbs up if you're with me. I don't want anyone falling asleep. I hope you don't. I mean, I don't intend for this to be boring, but just engage with me. I really want this to be as enlightening and interesting as possible. Okay, great. So, what is human trafficking? So I believe it's always important to clearly outline what this crime is, and that's what human trafficking is. If we just want to even put it in one word, it is a crime. So we'll start by looking into the definition of human trafficking. So it is the action or practice of illegally transporting people from one country or area to another, typically for the purpose of forced labor or sexual exploitation. So that is kind of what I would say a generic definition of human trafficking. But I would like us to look into the more conclusive and internationally approved definition. And this has been provided by the Palermo Protocol. So this definition was introduced in December 2003. The United Nations General Assembly adopted the Palermo Protocol, and it's also outlined as the protocol to prevent the suppression the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. And the good news is that as of May 2020, this has now been adopted by 176 party states. So it is something that is well defined and well known. So we're going to look into what this definition actually is. So I know what you're thinking. This probably looks like quite a mouthful, but I'm going to help you guys dissect it. And in fact, the Palermo Protocol has an approach that enables us to do that. It puts together a really good defining mechanism that enables us to conclusively outline when a practice is a crime of human trafficking. So let's look into this now. We'll break it down. So there's 3 categories that break down the Palermo Protocol: the act, what is done; the means, how it is done; and the purpose, why it is done. So let's see how it works. In order for an action to be considered human trafficking, it has to meet these 3 conditions. And this table right here is going to help us look into this further. So the act. There needs to be some form of recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. In terms of the means, this recruitment or receipt of persons has to be done through the use of threat, force, or coercion. So it has to be done against the will of the victim. And the purpose must be to exploit the victim for the trafficker's financial gain or satisfaction. And this really helps to break down how it works. And when you think about the purpose, it's usually monetary. It's usually for financial gain. That's what drives human trafficking, unfortunately. It's a very, very lucrative practice. Okay. So this outlines what the definition of trafficking is. I hope this was clear and well explained. And just to ensure I did make sense, please give me a thumbs up on your screen, just so I know that you guys are all still with me. Okay, thank you. Right, so we're now going to go further and look into the types of human trafficking. There are quite a range of types, and human trafficking can come in many forms. So just as a disclaimer, the types that I'm going to speak on are not the only types of human trafficking, but I'm going to cover, especially for the purpose of time, the most common forms of human trafficking. So there are 3 common types of human trafficking. 1, sexual exploitation; 2, forced labor; and 3, domestic servitude. Another one is also organ donation. That one isn't as common, and we do intend to explore further webinars that will be able to break down and focus on the types of human trafficking. But obviously the purpose of today is to talk about the impact of COVID-19. So I just want to touch on this for educational purposes, and just for you guys to know that this is what I would call the most common types of human trafficking. Okay, so let's take a further look into each type of human trafficking. We'll start with sexual exploitation. So this is usually when someone is deceived, coerced, or forced to take part in sexual activity against their own will. And this usually happens, you know, in the form of prostitution. You have brothels, massage saunas, escort agencies, pole, lap dancing. I know that in parts of Asia, particularly the Philippines, they recruit a lot of young underage girls into the pole and strip club industry. You have girls who are like 15, 16 years old, you know, lying about their age and working there, and that's where they will be recruited to offer sexual services after as well. Forced marriage is also a form of that, and use of pornographic sites. And we're going to touch on the pornographic industry later on as well, because the impact of COVID-19 has meant that the use of technology is something that a lot of traffickers are relying on now, unfortunately, in order to facilitate their services. Okay. So let's see, we're going to now look into the next type, which is forced labor. So this is where people are coerced to work for little or no remuneration, often under threat of punishment. There are a number of means through which a person can be coerced, including the use of violence or intimidation, accumulated debt. So in some countries, when, say, a family owes a certain individual a certain amount of money, they will be held under something that's called debt bondage, and they will be forced to work for a long amount of time to quote unquote pay off the debt. But what you do find is that because of those, how they're able to influence the families, there is no record keeping of when the debt is actually paid. So you find people having to work decades, and obviously die off and it has to be passed on to their children and so on and so forth. I actually represented a victim of debt bondage in pro bono. He was from Vietnam and he had to flee from Vietnam because he was subjected to debt bondage and he was trying to seek asylum here in the UK. So it is something that people really use in order to, you know, hold people enslaved and have them working, and usually it's something that they cannot get out of, unfortunately. Another way that people are able to inflict forced labor is through retention of identity papers, and also threat of exposure to immigration authorities. Human trafficking, as we know, is something where people are being transported, recruited from other countries. It could be from parts of Africa, Asia, to the Western world, the UK, America, and a lot of the time they don't have the right immigration papers. So that's something that, you know, traffickers would hold over their heads to make them do things against their own will as well. So we'll also look into domestic servitude. So domestic servitude is when someone works within their employer's home, performing a variety of tasks. So it's important for us to really clarify the distinction here, because you do have legitimate people who can work in people's homes, such as nannies, au pairs, even people who are maids and cleaners and so on and so forth. When this becomes exploitive and when this becomes human trafficking is when they are working for long hours with little or no pay, and they're living under very, very bad conditions. I've read stories of women sleeping on floors, being given nothing to eat. A lot of the time they've been promised by, say, a family member that they're taking them somewhere better for them to make more money, and they find themselves in these situations. And these women or men may suffer physical and sexual abuse as a result of this also. Okay. So out of all of these types of human trafficking, out of these types of human trafficking, I would say the most common type, and statistics do prove this, is sexual exploitation. It makes up to 79% of the practice, and the victims of sexual exploitation are predominantly women and girls. Okay. So now I think what's so important is the statistics and the facts to really prove that everything I'm saying is actually legitimate and true. So that's what we're going to really look into now. I will just let you know that all of these facts are from the International Labour Organization. We will share all our links of sources right after the webinar. We'll email it to everyone as well for you guys to do your further research and digging as well. So that's just to let you know. Okay, so there are currently approximately 40.3 million victims of human trafficking worldwide, 5.4 victims of modern slavery for every 1,000 people. And it also means that 1 in 4 victims of modern slavery are children. There is a high amount of children who are who have become victims of human trafficking. So that's something that is really, really devastating, and unfortunately, it's still growing. Globally, an estimated 71% of enslaved people are women and girls. Human trafficking is a very, very lucrative business. It generates an annual profit of approximately 150.2 billion, and that's since 2018. I also know, and I'll be happy to share this information further also, that in 2016, it was generating approximately 17 billion. And in 2 years, it has grown immensely, which is very, very shocking and upsetting. 99 billion of this comes from the commercial sexual exploitation industry as well. So as I said, sexual exploitation is the most common type of human trafficking because it generates the most profit, unfortunately, as well. So we're going to look into some graphs and into some further statistics which have been taken from the ILO. So here we can see this is tailored, I would say, to forced labor. We can see which region in our world generates the most amount of profits in terms of forced labor. So you can see 51.8 billion comes from the Asia Pacific region. And the next highest, which is a 46.9, comes from developed economies and the EU. Okay, and then it goes further down. So you've got Central and South Eastern Europe and CIS, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. So you can see which part of the world is generating the highest amount of income from human trafficking, particularly here, forced labor. Okay, we're going to break this down further and look into how much annual profits are made per victim in these regions as well. So here, and as I said before, this is for forced labor, specific to forced labor. The highest is actually from developed economies and the EU, 34.8 thousand US dollars is generated from developed economies and the European Union as well. So it's really, really highlighting this even further. Now, if we take a further look into it per sector, it concludes what I was saying before about how sexual exploitation is the most common, generating 21.8 thousand as well. So in comparison to construction, manufacturing and mining, or agriculture or domestic work, sexual exploitation accrues the highest level of profit. Okay, one thing I've found is that a lot of people tend to think that human trafficking is something that occurs mainly in like third world countries, or that it's a relic of the past. And I believe that these statistics prove those assumptions to be wrong. You know, human trafficking is happening right here on our doorstep. I live in the UK. I was born and raised here. And I have to say my younger years, practices like this were things that I just didn't think was happening so prevalently in the UK, and it really, really is happening here. People are recruited from third world countries, you know, from other parts of the world, but the practice of it is very, very much prevalent here. So that's something that I'd really like to highlight. Okay. All right, so I hope you guys are still with me. Please give me a thumbs up just so I know you're following, and that would be great. Thank you so much. Okay, so one thing I really want us to look into now is the effects that human trafficking has on victims. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because in comparison to other crimes, human trafficking has such a grave effect because human beings are a commodity. You know, you can look at drug trafficking, okay, the trafficking and moving drugs, but when you're moving human beings, it's, even if they do get rescued, even if they're no longer victims, there are so many other implications that affect their health and well-being. And that is why this is such a grave crime. And that's why I really want us to highlight this today as well. So let's have a look into this. Right, so victims of human trafficking suffer effects mentally, physically, and emotionally. But we're going to really look into the mental, physical, and financial aspects as well. So let's see. Victims and survivors can experience devastating psychological effects. Many survivors end up experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, difficulty in relationships, depression, memory loss, anxiety, fear, guilt, shame, and severe forms of mental trauma. So survivors, even after they have been rescued, need an adamant amount of care and support, because it's not something they can wake up and just get over. This is something that affects them for the long run. They need a lot of therapy and a lot of assistance to really help them to cope and to be able to move on. And I do believe it's possible for them to be able to move on and to be able to build a better life, which is what ROMILDAMOR is dedicated to doing. But they need a helping hand to do that. So then we also want to look at the physical effects of this. So women and girls who have been coerced into sexual exploitation in particular can end up contracting sexually transmitted diseases and other medical issues as well as a result of this practice. Some may also end up pregnant. I know we are currently exploring some work in Colombia, and Andrea Hernandez, I'm sure she's on this call, we've spoken to quite a few charities, and they've spoken about some of the women who are survivors who now have children as a result of that. And it's also about caring for the women, their mental health, their well-being, but also looking at what support we can give to the children so that they don't end up in that cycle as well, because that can also happen where the children end up being trafficked too. So you can really see the counter effects and how this is a long journey, and there's so much support that needs to be provided for these women and girls also. All right, so then those in forced labor and domestic servitude can suffer from physical harm as a result of extreme work conditions, and also abuse from their traffickers as well. There's a lot of pressure that's been put on these individuals, so that's something that's important to highlight also. Okay, and in terms of finance, finance is crucial, and I say this before, it links to something I mentioned previously about how human trafficking is such a lucrative industry, and that's why it's so much on the rise, unfortunately, because of how much profit it generates. But it's key to highlight that the burden of financial stress on potential victims is what actually causes them to be vulnerable to traffickers. Okay, so it's the fact that, say for instance, young girls don't really have much money, or it's, you know, especially when they're young, money is something that, you know, they're looking out for. So if a trafficker promises this to them, that's a way to coin them in. I'm sure a lot of you know about the case of Jeffrey Epstein. Or if you do want to enlighten yourself more, there is a documentary on it on Netflix as well. And you can see that he really used money as a way to bring the girls into his practice, and also to use other girls to become traffickers because he was paying them money. Money and finance is a very, very, very smart tool that traffickers use to coin women and girls, and even men, as I said before, in terms of debt bondage. Money is always, always a key point that they use as a target. And when we look at survivors, due to missed opportunities, you find that they find it difficult to secure employment and legitimate streams of income. So sometimes, and one thing we're finding now as we're working with partners, NGOs, we're securing our partnerships with them, and they're telling us about the survivors that they're working with. A lot of them have missed out on school. They don't really have educational opportunities, and that's something we're trying to provide for them. So it makes it quite difficult for them to be able to secure a new job or really the career that they've wanted. So this is also something that we want to be able to combat, because if we're able to kill off the vulnerability, then it limits the risk of them being re-trafficked again. So that's really what I wanted to highlight here in terms of the effects and the impact that human trafficking has on victims and survivors. Okay, all right, so I mean, I don't want to blab on too much, so I just wanted to know if anyone has any questions. I'm just going to take a little pause here. Does anyone have any questions at all that they want to ask me? You can type it in the chat, or you can ask me also. You can raise your hand, or turn off your mic and ask. Anyone? No? Okay, cool. I will continue then. All right, so now we're going to look at COVID-19 and the impact that's been having on human trafficking. But obviously we want to start and break it down and look at what COVID-19 is. I don't need to talk too much about this because I think CNN and BBC have done enough of that for us, but we'll just, you know, highlight a few points before we go further. So coronavirus, as we all know, is a pandemic that has swept the globe since late 2019, causing a high increase in deaths in almost every country in the world. And it's very, very scary. This is such an unprecedented time. So the counter effects of this are economic downturn. I mean, we know that we're probably, if not in or approaching, a recession here in the UK and Europe. There's a stretch on government funding and support. Business closures. I know here in the UK we are starting to get somewhat back to normal, but we know that there are a lot of companies that have filed for bankruptcy and just shut down altogether completely because of the lockdown and the fact that they weren't able to operate business as usual. Unemployment, a lot of people have had job cuts, which is very, very unfortunate. And due to the lockdown, a lot of people have been in isolation. There's been a global care and concern for people's mental health during this time as well. So that's really what we're all facing now. It feels like in a very, very different world. And as I said earlier on in this webinar, that this is something we all feel. This is something we can all relate to. You know, there's no one out there who can say that, you know, they haven't been impacted in this way or another. Maybe not as grave as other people, but if we just speak about the lockdown and the fact that people can't go out and eat as they used to, or, you know, just go and visit their family and friends, there's impacts in so many different ways, and we're all feeling it. Okay, so that's really, you know, what COVID-19 and coronavirus has done to our world. So I would like us to now look at the link of human trafficking and COVID-19, and how COVID-19 is really now creating more of an impact in the already grave crime of human trafficking. Okay, so let's have a look into this now. So both survivors and victims of human trafficking have had a limited access to support as a result of COVID-19. Okay, so the United Nations carried out a survey between 94 human trafficking survivors from 40 different countries. And this survey was just to show what coronavirus has done and how it's impacted their lives. So the results predominantly showed that survivors reported a lack of access to various basic needs. And I'm going to highlight those needs and the statistics behind this survey, and just to show what impact has been made. Okay, so food and water. 43% reported significant difficulty in accessing food and water as a result of this pandemic, and I would say also because of the lockdown. So this is also the fact that I want to highlight. We're speaking about survivors here. So when you have human trafficking survivors, a lot of them are in, like, they would rely on government public funding. They will rely on safe houses, charities, specific charities that are able to offer accommodation and food and water. But as a result of the pandemic, resources have been limited. You know, people had to social distance. Not a lot of people could operate the sort of safe houses as well as before. So we can see the impact that this is happening here. Remember, this is across 40 different countries as well. Yeah, so this is in terms of food and water. Then in terms of safe accommodation, as I mentioned before, 27.2 reported that their safety in accommodation has worsened due to the pandemic. Due to the lockdown, safe houses cannot provide accommodation and care for as many victims as possible. And there's just been also a lot of lack of access to government support, which is something that I'm really going to touch on very, very soon, which is something that has been reported recently. So we will definitely speak on that further also. Okay, healthcare. Healthcare is something we know to be one thing we all need, and I know that as a result of the virus, I'm sure many of us during the lockdown couldn't access our doctors as easily as possible, but we must have had other means of being able to get some support. Victims have this difficulty accessing primary doctors, hospitals and pharmacies. And in terms of the survivors, 67% of respondents have said that their access to medical services have worsened due to the pandemic, and 42.6% have said that their health had worsened as well due to the pandemic. Before, when I was talking about the impact that the impact that human trafficking is having on victims, I spoke about how even in sexual exploitation, a lot of women and girls contract a lot of viruses and diseases. So we can really see why their health would have worsened during this pandemic as well. So that's another point and another effect of COVID-19 on them. And we're going to talk about their psychological state. So the mental health and well-being of victims of human trafficking is something that is so, important and strong. So 68% confirmed that their psychological state and family relationships had worsened. 54% said that their access to psychological services had become more limited due to the pandemic. And this is a very serious concern because many victims suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So we can see that their mental health and well-being is at a very critical stage, and they really need as much support as possible, more than ever right now also. So we're going to look at general support and legal support. This is something that all-round survivors and victims of human trafficking need ongoing throughout their experience. And as a result of COVID-19, 40% from the survey confirmed that their access to information, administrative procedures and interpreters had become somewhat or significantly worse due to the pandemic, respectively. 32% said that their access to assistance in cases of domestic violence or abuse had become somewhat or significantly worse due to the pandemic, and 35% said that their access to legal assistance had also become limited. So if we just look into this a bit further, so if we look at the first point, administrative procedures can range from anything at all, be it, support in applying for jobs, just even getting help for basic applications, for council support from the government, and interpreters as well. As we know it, human trafficking victims, a lot of them have come from foreign countries, if it's that they've come from another country here to the UK or to America, or even if they have been taken from, say, Africa to Asia as well, or just other cross-jurisdictional borders. They may not speak the local dialect, they may not speak the local language, and so when they need support as survivors or even as victims, a lot of the time they need interpreters, and access to this has become limited as a result of the pandemic, meaning that they can't communicate effectively what their needs are and who they need to help and support them given that time. So we can see from these statistics that the UN has put together how much it has been limited as a result of coronavirus. And then also 32% said that their access to assistance in cases of domestic violence or abuse had somewhat or significantly worsened. So one thing we need to understand is that, of course, we know with the pandemic happening, the lockdown meant that no one could go anywhere. And so it meant that the victims were stuck 24/7 with their traffickers, and the stress that the traffickers are now feeling because they're not able to gauge a lot of profit and money as before, they will take it out on victims. I'm sure you guys have probably heard reports that have confirmed that domestic violence has increased as a result of the pandemic and the fact that everyone has been quarantined. That is also being inflicted here on human trafficking victims as well, and we can see that from these stats also. And then in terms of legal assistance, so at the beginning, Megan, when she introduced everyone, she did mention that here at ROMILDAMOR, we are trying our best to figure out how we can actually provide legal support. I am a lawyer by practice, so pro bono is something I'm very, very, very passionate about, particularly because there are so many people out there who need legal support and assistance, and it just isn't right and fair that they shouldn't be able to get access to that simply because they don't have the funds and means to do so. So you can see here that because, of the fact that everyone is in lockdown, things are somewhat better, yes, but the support that they need has been limited, and we want to do our best to be able to still carry on that support, even if it means through virtual means. Having lawyers speak to survivors, through the phone or web talks. We want to be able to do that and be able to speak to the right, government agencies and the courts to get them the right protection and assistance that they need. So that's what we're working on too. Okay. So one thing we're also going to touch on is immigration. As I said before, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it all links together, I promise. A good amount of human trafficking victims and survivors have been taken from their home countries in order to be exploited. The UN report confirmed that 33% said that their ability to return to their country of origin has become more difficult. as a result of the pandemic, which we all understand. So it's the case where even if we look at it on the flip side, I mean, when I was even doing pro bono work for the Hammersmith and Fulham Law Centre, we had cases of people who had fled their country to come here and seek asylum. That option isn't available because a lot of borders have been closed. And then also for people who want to go home because they've been brought here under the wrong means, borders have been closed. It's a lot more difficult, not to say it's impossible, but it isn't as straightforward because of the health risks and because of the fact that COVID is just taking over a lot of our practices. So that's another point to implement as well. So in terms of the legal assistance that we want to be able to provide to survivors at ROMILDAMOR, it's working with immigration lawyers as well. So we've been working on putting that together and being able to see how we can support these women and girls to get the right immigration support that they need all round. So that is that. And then we're going to look at financial effects as well. So I feel like, even though I said that, you know, the effects of COVID-19 on human trafficking is very much a select group of people. In terms of finance, I think we all know that a lot of people have been impacted financially as a result of coronavirus. But we can imagine how much worse it would be for people from vulnerable communities, such as victims of human trafficking. So if we look at the stats here from the UN, 67.3% of respondents said that their financial well-being had become significantly worse due to the pandemic. 60% of respondents have faced difficulty in accessing good conditions of employment in general, which I'm sure you and I can both agree is understandable. And that is why, as I said, ROMILDAMOR wants to work its hardest now more than ever to find good employment and academic development opportunities for women and girls who have been from the human trafficking, you know, background, and just to be able to provide them with a way that they can have more of a stable future and a stable income going forward all around. So yeah. Okay, so these are the effects that we've spoken about, right? What I also want to highlight is that, yes, coronavirus somewhat it doesn't feel like it's as bad as it was, say, in March here in the UK, or even like late 2019. And we're just hoping that things will clear up and things will get much better, right? I mean, I recently read a report that China is, you know, somewhat coming back to normal. So you can see that things are hopefully coming back to normal. But it's important to highlight the risk of what this effect will do in the future. So yes, these are the impacts. And even if coronavirus disappears, or even if it just gets much better and the impacts aren't there, there's still counter effects that will continue to go on. So we're going to look into that. So as a result of everything that's going on and the impact that this virus is having on trafficking victims, there's a higher risk of mental and physical health issues for victims and survivors of human trafficking. There is a higher risk of re-trafficking of survivors. So as I was saying before, now that a lot of them have financial burden on their shoulders and there's like a limited access to employment opportunities, it could cause them to be re-trafficked. It could cause them to have to go back, not by choice, but just by vulnerability to the traffickers, and have to rely on that for some means of stability, if any at all. So that is where the risk is very high, and it's all due to the lack of access to social services and immigration support as well. So that's something that is important to touch. And one thing that I'm really, really passionate about and I really want to highlight is technology. So we all know, even this webinar is proof of that, because prior to this, all our events were in person. We are relying heavily on technology to function as a result of coronavirus. Everyone is doing virtual events, as you can see, webinars. I mean, I've been working from home since March, and I know a lot of people are also. And we are relying on technology, and so are traffickers as well. So a lot of people are purchasing and selling human beings on the internet, and there's been an increase of this as a result of coronavirus. There is also unfortunately, an increase in the use of pornographic sites during this pandemic. The UN has also confirmed that there has been a 95% increase in the viewing of child pornography during this pandemic. So you can really see what technology is doing. There's an incredible organization called Thorn. It was founded by Ashton Kutcher and his wife, and they are using artificial intelligence to combat human trafficking, which is incredible. And I think it's something that is needed now more than ever, because even when things do, you know, quote unquote, go back to normal, technology is still thriving. It was thriving before coronavirus. So you can see that it's going to take a much more prevalent effect, because you can see from the results, people are relying on it heavily. And so that's something that we really want to highlight here as well. Okay, so that pretty much concludes the educational element of today's webinar. I would just like to share majority of my sources with you for you guys to take note on. And yeah, you can look into it further. I do highly advise, you know, that you read into this further. You can always ask us questions if you want any more information. This is the first of many webinars, as I said before. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the bulk of this webinar also. And now I'm also going to talk briefly about what you guys can actually do to contribute to this fight that we're all in against human trafficking. So we're going to briefly touch on that. So talk about it. Talking about it is just something that's so simple but so powerful. As Megan said at the beginning of this webinar, here at ROMILDAMOR, we believe that knowledge is power, and the more people know about something like this, the more they would share about it, and the more that we can really get our voices out there and, you know, demand a lot of support. There's something I wanted to touch on, and that links to lobbying the government. And the reason why I put that on this list is because I read a report recently that announced that the UK government is making cuts on funding, public funding to support human trafficking survivors. So there's specific funding out there that supports human trafficking survivors, but unfortunately, as a result of coronavirus, they've made cuts to that, which is very, 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 very unfortunate. And it's your voices that can really help to reverse things like that. If you work together, I mean, I know that we've got societies here from UCL. You can partner with us here at ROMILDAMOR so we can work together and lobby the government to talk about these issues. You can write to your local MP, attend more webinars. As I said before, this is the first of many, so you can educate yourself. I love reading on this stuff, because the more you know, the more passionate you are, and the more you can figure out what you can actually contribute to make a change. Yeah, as I said, we are working our hardest to set up as much structures and schemes to support human trafficking survivors. We are currently in the works of partnering with some NGOs, ELAS and Lantern Rescue, who rescue human trafficking victims. ELAS has a safe house here in the UK, and we will be partnering with them and providing educational and career development opportunities for the survivors at that safe house. So you can donate to ROMILDAMOR, sponsor what we're doing, and yeah, just keep supporting, keep talking about it, keep the conversation going, keep learning and keep enlightening yourself. And I believe, I hope, and I'm very, very hopeful as a person, that we can make some impact in one way or another. Okay, so that is pretty much it on my end. I'd really love to take some questions from you guys. So you can raise your hand on the function and we can unmute your microphone. You can ask us questions, or you can type it in the chat box and we can speak from there. So let's hear your questions. Okay, let's see. We've got some questions coming through. So the first one is, trying to see, from Saeed. I hope I'm saying your name right. Oh, sorry. There's a lot of questions and I'm trying to scroll up. Okay, let me see. All right, I can see a question from Dania. Will there be long-term repercussions after COVID-19 for not providing support right now? Yes, 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 most definitely. I mean, I already highlighted that what the repercussions are right now. And one thing I would definitely say is that if we don't step in and provide as much support, it would only get worse. It's important to highlight that the facts statistics I provided was only from 95 human trafficking survivors from 40 countries. And if you compare that to the 40.3 million victims in the world right now, that's a very, very tiny fraction. So that's just a small fraction of what's probably being reflected across the globe. So it's definitely important for us to step in right now. We have a question from Tracy. Does human trafficking always involve some sort of travel? No, I mean, not entirely. So someone could be trafficked in their hometown. We have the case of Cyntoia Brown. I'm sure you guys have heard of her before. It was a case of a young girl. She was 16 and she faced murder. She faced a conviction of life imprisonment for murdering a man who purchased her for sex. She was trafficked by a pimp in her hometown. So she wasn't physically taken from like another country or another part of America to another part. It could literally be the case where they're together and he makes her go and, you know, facilitate prostitution services or so on and so forth. So it doesn't always mean that they have to travel. Okay, Akin O, how much effect does human trafficking have on the pornographic industry and how can we combat this? Okay, so the stats I showed that, you know, there's a 95% increase in the viewing of child prostitution alone during this pandemic really shows how much of an effect it's having, because traffickers are relying on the internet to facilitate their services. That's how they're making money now. So instead of sending girls out to be involved in prostitution, they're making girls do things on cameras, which is very, very unfortunate. How can we combat this? Very, very good question. There is a petition going out to shut down Pornhub, which is, as you know, a pornographic site, but it's known to facilitate a lot of human trafficking practice and child trafficking activity as well. So in our notes that we'll send back to everyone, we will send the link for that so you guys can really do your part and, you know, sign the petition and being part of that fight. As I said before, in terms of what you can do, you can really, you know, lobby the government, speak to your MP, really come together as a community to highlight the fact that, yes, everyone is relying on the internet and it's good, it's working for us because people can work from home. We can do online events like this, it's wonderful, but there's an increase in human trafficking still. It's not combating it, it's actually making it worse. So that's how we can really take part. So FNACV, I hope I said your name right. Could you please elaborate on how women get reinducted into trafficking because of lack of support? Okay, so like how women get re-trafficked? Yeah, definitely. So basically, the key to an individual becoming a victim of human trafficking is vulnerability. So when there are risks of them being vulnerable, that is how they can get re-trafficked. A classic example, as I highlighted before, is the fact that if they have the financial burden on them, there is a way that traffickers can use that as an opportunity to coin them back into that practice. Because when a trafficker is holding a victim and making them work for them, they will feed them, they will give them a house to live in, they would have some kind of shelter, do you see? So, and if they are not with them and they don't have any other means of food or shelter or support, then it's very likely that they may end up relying on them again and the cycle can continue. One thing that is so crucial is the mental effect that traffickers impose on human trafficking victims. So they're very smart. They play in the mind. So one thing that we would even highlight in our future webinars, when we want to do more digging into human trafficking itself, it's the baby boy approach. So a lot of traffickers use this for young girls. So they will start off nicely, buying them flowers, gifts, taking them out, making them look cute, making them feel pretty. That's how they start to play into their mind. And then with that, it makes it very difficult for the girls to just walk away, because it's like they feel they owe them something in a sense. They don't instantly come to them and say, you're gonna be a prostitute for me or anything. No, no, no. They really start, it's a whole process. They start with wining and dining them, they play into their mind, and then they make them do all those other things as well. Okay, so we have a question from Isabella Lado. How have victims of the kafala system, many of whom have been trafficked into domestic servitude, been impacted by COVID-19? I know this is not explicitly linked to sexual exploitation, but it has been and continues to be a pressing issue in Southwest Asia. Okay, so how have they been trafficked into domestic servitude and impacted by COVID-19? I don't know too much on the facts on this, and I'm always open to say that I don't want to speak too prevalently on something that I'm not 100% knowledgeable about, but I know that I did read an article about the effects of COVID-19 in Southwest Asia, and it was more focused on the fact that the support that certain charities out there were trying to provide to the woman had been really, really limited because of the lockdown in that part of the world. And the fact that they were trying to see how they could support the victims in other ways. So through, use of mobile phones and technology, but it had become really, really hard because some of the victims have become now suicidal, and they felt very much even more enslaved simply because they weren't able to have the access to the mentors and the colleagues that they were receiving support from before. So that's something that has been more effective there. But Isabella, I'd really love to speak to you further on that. So please feel free to drop me an email, or I'll link in with you too. We can speak more about what's going on in that side of the world. Okay, we have a question from Cameron. The sharp rise you mentioned 2 years ago, is some of this due to discovering more types of human trafficking that was going on previously but not known about, so not included in statistics, or is it an increase over those 2 years? That's a very, very good question. I believe that it's actually an increase over 2 years. However, these stats that I confirmed are from the United Nations, and that's one of the most reliable sources, UN and the ILO. However, as you said, it's true. It's probably the case that the 17.2 billion that was being generated in 2016 could have been much more, because when you think about places like, I don't know, parts of Asia or parts of Africa, you have to really think, how are they able to actually track the funding that they receive? How are they actually able to track the trafficking activity that's occurring? So it is possible that it's more of the case that human trafficking is becoming more talked about, and it's more out there, so people are able to record it more. I think the awareness of it is really much on a rise in comparison to 2016. So I think maybe the rise could have been the case that it's more of an awareness rise, as opposed to those statistics being the case that it was definitely much less than the 150.2 billion that it is in 2018. I hope I answered your question right, Cameron. Let me know if I didn't, just type and say you're not making sense, and I'll repeat myself again. But yeah, I think we've become a lot more aware about it recently. So maybe the statistics are showing and reflecting that more. Yeah. Okay, Irina, how would you say that the rate of convictions of traffickers is going to be affected by COVID? That's such a good question. I hope it doesn't lessen. I mean, one thing I would let everyone know is the convictions of traffickers is nothing in comparison to what it should be right now. Traffickers are really getting away with this practice, and it is very, very heartbreaking. Sorry. And the fact is that court systems have been limited due to the lockdown. So it's very, very difficult for, lawyers and people in the legal field to really do as much prosecuting as they were able to before. It's not as easy. Also, another thing that we have to realize is public funding, which I said has already been cut down as a result of this. And one thing that one member of my team, actually, Maria and Evan, shout out to you guys, they highlighted this, and it's so, so true. As a result of the lockdown, law enforcement aren't able to really see human trafficking activity as much as they would have been able to see it before, because everyone is away, everyone's in their houses. So it's hard for them to track down and investigate it. So to answer your question, Irina, I feel like the rate of convictions is going to be harder to acquire. I don't want to be pessimistic and say it's going to go down, but I feel like in order for it to get better, we need to highlight the fact that human trafficking is happening more on the internet now, and the law enforcement can shift their focus and look there in order to do a lot more investigations, digging, and convictions as well. So yeah. All right. Wow, I've been talking for a long time. So Evan, thank you. It looks like we are going to round up our question and answer session, as it is already 12 o'clock. So I am going to pass it on to Megan now. Thank you guys so, so much. I really appreciate you joining me. Megan, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very, very much, Romilda. That was amazing and very, very insightful. Even though I already work for Romilda that was very informative, so thank you. Thank you also to everyone who has attended today, particularly for everyone who asked questions. Those were really, really insightful. I'd also like to give a very quick shout out to all of the UCL Society representatives who are here today. It's great to have that representation here, obviously. Now, to announce our giveaway, one of our wonderful social media coordinators, Palmel, has gone through and has identified, well, randomly used an online search engine to identify who is going to be the winner of our giveaway today from the Korean White Company, and that winner is Irina. So Irina, congratulations. We will be sending you an email afterwards to confirm how all of this is going to work, but congratulations, and again, thank you for coming. If any one of you would like to stay updated and remain connected with Romilda and more, you can see just on screen here our handles on social media. We are on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. We have a website and we have an email. So feel free to reach out to us however you would like. We are always updating on our platforms regarding any of our activities, future webinars, and with general information so that you can remain updated and informed about the practice of human trafficking and what you can do to be a better ally to all of these survivors. We'll also be sending a published draft of today's webinar to everybody, so please look out for it. And with that, that concludes our webinar today. Thank you again for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day. Thank you.